Thank you, John. Reading from the Gospel of John. It's very good. Now, this last week, the men's football team, this week, the Spanish men's football team won the World Cup. It's the highest honour in world football, and they celebrated and experienced great glory. World Cup glory. The news headlines described their achievements in terms of glory. Spain celebrates World Cup glory. Spain secures World Cup glory. Their victory was glorious. And it was something that even Donald Trump didn't mind trying to get a little piece of. Glory. Glory is associated with sport and sporting victory. There's a football team in Australia called the Perth Glory. There's a football magazine called Glory, and it said that winning a title or a cup brings much glory. Glory is a high honour or praise given to someone or something because of a notable achievement, or because there's something particularly special about someone. And notice that glory is something that is given by someone else because of something that you've done. You just can't claim your own glory. It needs to be achieved and then noticed by other people and acknowledged by them. So the Spanish football team earned their glory by winning the World Cup. And this was acknowledged and noticed by the entire world, even Donald Trump. And he tried to take a little bit of the glory for himself. But today we encounter a story from the Bible about glory. It's where Jesus starts to reveal something of his glory. But this doesn't involve sport, trophies, or crowds. Jesus shows his glory by doing something quite miraculous. A miracle far greater and far more impressive than anything that even Lionel Messi could conjure. Jesus performs a remarkable miracle to reveal something of his glory at a wedding in Cana. Now, this is a familiar story for many of you, I'm sure. But just like watching a favourite rerun of one of your favourite TV shows, it's still enjoyable to watch and think about again. So this morning we're going to reflect on this famous and glorious moment in Jesus' life, and we can be reminded again of how great Jesus is and his glory. And this glorious event occurs in the second chapter of the Gospel of John. And we began looking at Gospel of John last year. We did 4 messages on chapter 1, but now we're coming back to John. And if we look back in chapter 1, already we can see that there have been some spoilers. We've been primed to expect something glorious. For in the prologue, the first 18 verses of John's Gospel, after John's already told us that Jesus is the Word become flesh who has glory, John and his friends have seen this glory. So it says, the Word became a human being, became flesh, he made his home with us. We have seen his glory. It is the glory of the one and only who came from the Father. And the Word was full of grace and truth. So John has seen his glory, but we haven't yet. So as we read John's Gospel, we're expecting something. We're expecting to see glory. John has seen his glory, a very special and unique type of glory, but we're not exactly sure what exactly that glory might be. What could his glory be? Sporting victory? Is this going to be a sporting story? Military victory, gladiatorial victory in the gladiator ring. These would be the usual sources of glory for men in the ancient world. So it's not clear at this point what this glory is. So we're expecting John to expand on this further, what this glory might be as the gospel unfolds. And we begin to get an idea of what Jesus' glory might be like at a wedding at a very insignificant place in Galilee called Cana. On the third day, there was a wedding. It took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. It is always an honour to be invited to a wedding. And here Jesus, his mother, and his disciples were invited. But there's a problem. A wedding day fail. You've probably heard of, wedding fails. I'm not sure if you've seen the videos and so on, where something goes wrong, terribly wrong at a wedding. The special day is ruined by something untoward happening. So Di and I went to a wedding once where there was a wedding day fail. It was because the organist couldn't play the music. And so that was memorable, but it was a bit of a fail. Or there's this catering at this wedding was, it was poor, perhaps. Like that's a wedding day fail. Maybe they forgot the plates, or the plates were stolen. It's not really sure what's happened there. There was another wedding day fail in the United States where a wedding party was taking a photo on a dock in a lake and the dock fell. It just couldn't hold them in. But there's actually one particular wedding day fail that I always enjoy watching. So now we've got that video primed for you. It's a short video. I hope this is going to be enjoyed. This is probably the worst wedding fail of all time. Many of you have probably seen it, but Peter's going to play that for us right now, just to see what happens. I'm not sure if you remember seeing this one. She got married and baptised at the same time. so that's probably a reason not to get married at the Grand Canyon. But anyway, so there were some of the YouTube comments on that. Anyway, not sure if you've seen that one before. That's memorable, isn't it? It's a wedding day fail. It didn't go as they were going. So there seems to be a theme, though, with water and wedding day fails and catering and water. And this was actually the case with our story from the Bible today, because Jesus' mother alerts Jesus of a particularly significant wedding fail. In verse 3, when the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." Now, in the ancient world, wine was a symbol of joy and celebration, and running out of wine at a wedding would be considered a giant wedding fail. It was a breach of social and cultural etiquette. For the host was responsible to provide wine for the wedding guests. And they were supposed to provide them for wine for 7 days. So when the wine ran out, the guests probably might have been reaching for their phones or their tablets or whatever it was, Instagram accounts, and saying, #wedding fail, they ran out of wine. This is a big problem. But why would Jesus' mother be telling Jesus that they have no more wine? Did she know something about Jesus that could help the situation? Did she know something about Jesus that could have helped solve this fail? Maybe. Possibly. But Jesus doesn't seem that interested in solving the problem. For after his mother's raised this, Jesus responds perhaps a little harshly. He says, "Dear woman, why are you telling me about this?" Jesus replied, "The time for me to show who I really am isn't here yet." Now his response seems a little harsh, but Jesus seems to think that if he were to do something directly and visibly about this, it would reveal who he was. If he was to stand up here and provide some wine or to do something, it would actually reveal something about his true identity. But Jesus is stepping back from this. He's reluctant to do that at this particular point. He says, "The time for me to show who I really am isn't here yet. His hour is not yet come." The time for Jesus to reveal and show his full glory, and hence his full identity, is not yet. Jesus doesn't want his glory, his true self, to be revealed at that time, at a time that is not his. But Jesus still does something quiet, something invisible, behind the scenes, which actually does reveal something of who Jesus is. Jesus will spare the host embarrassment, but he will avoid stealing the spotlight from the bride and the groom. He's not going to try to do a Trump here and stand up and make the wedding all about him. And Jesus' mother expresses faith in him. She says, his mother said to the servants, "Do what he tells you." 6 stone water jars stood nearby. The Jews used water from that kind of jar for special washings. They did that to make themselves pure and clean. Each jar could hold 20 to 30 gallons. And Jesus said to his servants, "Fill the jars with water," and so they filled them to the top. Now here Jesus orders 6 stone jars to be filled with water. And these jars were used for Jewish purification, ritual purification, for cleansings. And so by mentioning these types of jars, this could perhaps reinforce the contrast between the law given through Moses, but grace and truth coming through Jesus. Jesus comes to fulfill, but also transform the Old Testament law and sacrificial system. So Jesus orders that these huge jars be filled to the top, which actually overcomes any idea of deception or fraud. He told them, "Now dip some out. Take it to the person in charge of the dinner." So at this point, you have to think, is Jesus setting up the wedding host for even more embarrassment? For not only is the wedding now out of wine, but they're now just going to be serving water. Great wedding. But also, how would the Jewish guests feel that their water at this wedding feast was served from ceremonial jars? It would be deeply disrespectful. This is a risky and potentially embarrassing move. But Jesus seems to know what he's doing. His actions are purposeful. They're deliberate. For something has happened, something remarkable. The outcome here was not embarrassment, but something far greater. The person in charge tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He didn't realize where it had come from, but the servants who had brought the water knew. Then the person in charge called the groom to one side. He said to him, "Everyone brings out the best wine first. They bring out the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best until now." This is clearly a miracle. A huge amount of water has been miraculously turned into wine. But not just any old wine, the best, the most expensive wine, extraordinary wine. A huge amount of wine. It's probably equivalent to about 1,000 bottles of vintage wine. This is no illusion. Embarrassment has turned to adulation. This is amazing. But Jesus did this in secret. We're told that the person in charge of the wedding feast didn't know what happened. But the servants knew what had happened. Jesus had secretly saved the wedding. There's no wedding fail here. A huge amount of water had been turned into the very best wine. So what does this mean? Now we're just going to get something ready here, Peter. What do we think when we see someone someone miraculously turning water into wine? Well, how would you react? Well, we actually have a video of some people who had to wrestle with this exact issue. We're going to show a video now about how people reacted when a holy man turns water miraculously into wine. Thanks, Peter. I enjoyed that video. I think it's very funny. But when these people saw the miracle, I don't think the twinkle went with I think that was added, the sound effect. But so how did they react? they were reacted like, what's going on? They seemed unsure, didn't they? I love that guy's expression, like, what is going on here? They're puzzled. They seem to wonder, who is this person? Is this a trick? What are we to make of this? But in this video, this just for laughs gag, it all becomes clear when the participants see the camera and realise that this was actually a practical joke. But what if there was no camera there? No one to point and say, actually, this was just a joke. No one to come up and say, this was a trick. What would you think then? You scratch your head and think, the water was filled to the brim and suddenly it's the very best wine. Because this would have been the experience of the servants at the wedding in Cana, wouldn't it? They knew what happened. They'd filled the water jars and filled the water jars and out came the best wine. For once you dismiss the possibility of trick or fraud or mistake, then you're left with a conclusion that is perhaps even more challenging. Maybe something really remarkable happened. A miracle, perhaps. A real miracle where the normal laws of nature have been adjusted, which reveals that the person behind this trick, this miracle, has real power. And maybe this power is a sign that this person is someone special. And this is exactly the conclusion that John wants us to draw from this miracle as we consider the meaning of the water being turned into wine in verse 11. What Jesus did here in Cana in Galilee was the first of his signs. Jesus showed his glory by doing this sign, and the disciples believed in him. This miracle is the first of Jesus' signs. It is a sign. But a sign of what? Because a sign signifies something. Signs point to something, don't they? Signs reveal something. So, for example, now I don't mean this to be too offensive or rude, but anyway, if I was to show you this, there are certain signs or symbols here that point to us to identify what this particular person is. Now, because of the signs that I've given you, can you work out who is this person? They're what? They're a what? A toothless Collingwood supporter. That's right, they're a Collingwood fan, aren't they? That's right. Look, I don't mean to be offensive to Collingwood fans, but there are certain things about them that you've managed to identify. I didn't put any words there, but you can identify that they're Collingwood. They've got a Collingwood shirt on, and there's a few other things there that, I mean, look, it doesn't describe a Collingwood fan, does it? Look, I'm not trying to, but there's certain things about them that describe that they're the type of person that they are. Okay, maybe it's a bit unfair on Collingwood fans, so maybe I'll try something else. Okay, what is this a sign of? Okay, if I was to show you a sign there, what is that pointing you towards? Okay, there's another football, perhaps, maybe. What would that be a sign of? Sorry? Wealth, yeah, that's right. But there's also a particular type. Who is this person? They might be a Melbourne supporter. Exactly, a Melbourne Demons fan. Like Norm is looking in a bit of disgust there, but anyway, that's just a stereotype. It's okay, it's a bit of fun. I don't mean to be offensive, but okay, maybe this one's a bit easier. This one, these are signs of what? That they are another football person. St Kilda, that's right. There's wooden spoons and one trophy. So that's an indication. They're signs to point to who they are. And it's exactly the same with Jesus. There are certain things that he does, certain signs which reveal his identity. These signs show who he is. But what is exactly here, the sign from John chapter 2 that we see here, when he turns water into wine? What does this reveal about Jesus' true identity? Well, the first thing that this sign reveals is that Jesus has power. Jesus definitely, he has power. None of us could turn this amount of water, or any amount of water, into wine. None of us could turn even a small amount. This miracle reveals Jesus as someone with immense godlike power. Jesus does this without a word, no incantation. It's not magic, it's not a trick. It's power, the power of God. It's a sign which points to Jesus' power and hence something of his glory. But this sign, I think, also points to something more. It reveals that Jesus is full of grace and goodness. Jesus is full of grace because he saves the day. He saves the wedding host from embarrassment. He helps avoid a giant wedding fail. But he's also immensely good. For he doesn't just save the day by providing a few cheap boxes of cask wine from Costco. Jesus lavishes the equivalent of 1,000 bottles of the very best wine. I think this is a sign to show that Jesus is not stingy or second best. Jesus lavishes the very best for this wedding. This is a sign to show that Jesus is not stingy. Jesus wants the best for us. He is really, really good news. There can be a temptation, I think, in our world to think that when I follow Jesus, that he only wants what is boring, the plain, the simple, the cheap, the tough, the path of sacrifice. And there's elements of truth to that, but this can lead us to a view that the good and the pleasurable things of this world are therefore somehow wrong or unnecessary or not what God would want. Perhaps we can think a little bit like the old desert ascetics who lived in poverty in the desert, renouncing all worldly pleasures to serve God. Perhaps there's a temptation to think that this is preferable and what God really wants for us. But here I think this is a sign to show that God is actually good. He brings blessing. God is good and generous. He's not against enjoying the good things of this life. And then there's appropriate time to enjoy the best, to feast and to enjoy the very best of things. Of course, I don't think this means, therefore, we should lead a life of unbridled hedonism, pursuing the good things of life all the time. Not every day is a wedding day, but it does show something, I think. It reveals something of the goodness of God, the goodness and generosity of Jesus. God is not a God of stinginess and functionality, but of goodness, of flavour, of richness, and even at times excess. So as we see here, we can see that this miracle is a sign of Jesus' power and also his grace and his goodness. And hence this shows his glory, the glory of his power, grace, and goodness. But I think that there's even more going on. This miracle is a sign revealing even more about who Jesus is. And I think there's another clue in this passage about what this sign might mean. It's actually in the very first part of the chapter. On the third day, there was a wedding. It took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there. Okay. Now, this might seem like a bit of a puzzle, but what in that verse could be a sign to show the identity of Jesus? I'm not sure. Anyway, we could speculate, but I think it's actually on the third day. Now, why would this be an indication as to the nature of Jesus' identity? Well, when we read the Gospel, we need to remember that the authors were not just recording facts. Now, they weren't just simply writing down what happened. Now, the writers are writing what happened, absolutely. They're writing the truth, absolutely. But they are also deliberately and reflectively and selectively shaping their material and their presentation of Jesus at times to make important but subtle theological points. And I think John wrote on the third day here to make a couple of very significant allusions to show something even more profound about Jesus' identity. He doesn't just write on the third day to signify the passing of time, but I think he writes this for two reasons. The first reason is to show that this wedding, and hence this miracle, occurs on the seventh day of Jesus' public ministry, according to John. So if you read over John 1 and the start of chapter 2, we can see that John has deliberately described the action occurring over 7 consecutive days. Chapter 1 has the action occurring over 4 days, and now we come to the 7th day, and I think this is deliberate. Because when you hear about events occurring over 7 consecutive days at the start of a narrative, what are you thinking of? What are you alluding to? Anything that you might think about? 7 days is the same as creation, Genesis. And I think that there's an echo of creation here, that the 7 days of Genesis are being alluded to. So when Jesus turns water into wine on the 7th day, this is a sign that Jesus is bringing about a new kingdom, a new creation, a new age. The age of water, of ceremonial washing, of Moses and the law is past. The age of Jesus, a new creation of wine, richness and goodness and blessing, is here. It's subtle, but I think a significant sign that Jesus turning the water into wine shows that a new age is dawning. A new age is beginning. But I think there might be even more to this sign, and in John writing on the third day. It's a little bit of a question for those who know your Bibles really well and knows the Old Testament. Can anyone think of a story in the Old Testament which involved water being changed? Can anyone think of any stories in the Old Testament of water being changed? Can anyone think of one? People who know their Bibles really well? Yes, Barbie?
When Elisha put the axe in the water, the axe head floated.
The axe head floated. That's what it doesn't. The water doesn't change, though. I don't think, does it? No. The blood. That's in Exodus. That's Pharaoh. Yeah, that's kind of a change in a bad way. That's kind of going from water to blood. Can anyone think any stories in the Old Testament? Can anyone think, for those who know their Bibles well? This is a challenge for those. Okay. Mara, excellent. That's the one. Well done, Rosemary. Yes, excellent. The Bible scholars over here. We'll give you a crown of celery, perhaps. Maybe just forget that. There's a story in Exodus 15. If this is in Exodus 15, after Moses has led the people away from the Red Sea, they come to a place called Mara, where the water was bitter. And the people complain. So Moses threw a stick in the water, and the water miraculously became fit to drink. Now, this is a story that may be unfamiliar to many, but there it is in the Bible. It's in the Old Testament. It's a miracle. Undrinkable water was changed to drinkable water. Bitter water was miraculously changed to sweet water. But notice how long had they been travelling until that point? 3 days. On the third day, Moses turned the bitter waters of Mara into sweet waters. On the third day, Jesus turned ordinary water into sweet wine. Coincidence? Maybe it's a stretch. Maybe. But I wouldn't put it past John, who's the master author, to write this as a sign to show not only that, yes, a new age is dawning, but also the one greater than Moses is here. Moses needed a stick to turn bitter water into sweet water. Jesus only needed to speak. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. But I also wonder if there might even be a little bit more. For in the Bible, the relationship of God and his people is described as a marriage. God is a groom set to marry his bride, his people. And there is another prophecy in the book of Isaiah 25:6, which says, "On Mount Zion, the Lord who rules over all will prepare a feast for all the nations. The best and richest of foods and the finest aged wines will be served." This is a prophecy that the Lord will prepare a feast for his people. The best and richest of foods and the finest of wines, that the Lord himself will provide the best wines. So again, by Jesus turning the water into the very best of wine could be an illusion that the one greater of Moses, not just the one greater than Moses, but actually God himself has come. The Lord who promised to come and bring a rich feast of blessing to his people, including the finest of wines. Perhaps Jesus is the long-awaited bridegroom come to offer a relationship with his people. So this miracle reveals not just his power and his goodness, but also a sign to identify Jesus as the one greater than Moses, but also reveals Jesus as God himself coming to inaugurate a new age of blessing. There's a lot of meaning in Jesus turning water into wine. It's a very significant sign. And so this sign reveals more of who Jesus really is, his true identity, his true glory. When Jesus did here in Cana in Galilee was the first of his signs. Jesus showed his glory by doing this sign, and his disciples believed in him. A sign reveals Jesus as God himself, overturning the Jewish customs and laws, bringing in a new age, the powerful one to come. Jesus revealed in a quiet, behind-the-scenes kind of way, a profound picture of who he really is. Remains largely unnoticed, except for those who knew what happened. But this reveals his true glory. His glory is not revealed in a spectacular open way, not quite in the same way that the Spanish received their glory for winning the World Cup, or the type of glory that Donald Trump tried to take. But through this miracle, this quiet miracle, Jesus reveals for those who have the ears to hear, the eyes to see, that Jesus is ultimately God himself, the one who is truly glorious. And so his disciples believed in him. It's a sign to build faith in the readers. For us to know the true Jesus and for us to trust him, we can see this and trust in him because of his power, and he has shown us something of his glory. He's not a trickster, not a fraud, but he is the Lord. But this actually wasn't his greatest hour of glory. This hadn't actually come yet. But through this miracle, we can begin to see something of who Jesus is. Jesus is full of grace, greater than Moses, and we, like the disciples, can believe in him, trust in him, give our lives to him. Now today we have talked a lot about sport, but I think it's natural because sport is the common arena in our world today to talk about glory. There is the quote, the game lasts for only 90 minutes, but the glory lasts forever. But I think that though the Spanish team are basking in their glory at the moment, earthly sporting glory always fades. People who forget who win trophies. Trophies rust, fade, or get stolen. It's an unreliable glory. But the glory found in Jesus that is promised here will not fade or rust or be taken away. And this was the glory in Jesus which inspired former English Premier League footballer Gavin Peacock. Now, Gavin received some glory as a footballer. He played in the Premier League, he scored goals, and he received the adulation, played in an FA Cup final, hit the crossbar. They lost, but but he was in an FA Cup final, and he received the adulation of the crowd. But this glory ultimately didn't satisfy him. He felt empty. He was playing professional football, earning good money, but the glory of sport wasn't enough. But then he encountered Jesus at a youth meeting. He walked in with everything that the world says will bring you happiness and success, and he walked out knowing the glory of Jesus because he had found a greater glory. Here's the glory that we began to see here, the glory of Jesus' power, his goodness, his character. And here a new relationship begins, the new era, the new age. This is a glory that far outweighs any World Cup victory. Yet today we've only seen a glimpse, the very beginning of Jesus' true glory. His true glory won't be revealed until later in the gospel of God, where Jesus does something even more glorious, more unexpected, and more public when he dies on a cross, which is the true demonstration of his glory. Sorry for the spoiler. But through this miracle, what we've seen today, through this first sign, Jesus shows his glory. He begins to show that he is worth trusting. He's worth believing in. He brings good news. Jesus is good news. Because what Jesus did here in Cana in Galilee was the first of his signs. Jesus showed his glory by doing this sign, and his disciples believed in him. Let's pray. Father God, we thank you for Jesus. We thank you for this sign that shows us who Jesus is, that he is worthy of our trust and belief. Thank you for Jesus' power, for his goodness, but also that he comes bringing a new age of freedom, goodness, and love. Help us to trust Jesus in all things and live for him, knowing his goodness, his power in all things. Amen.